I'd like to introduce Ed Ainscough from Lunnon Metals.
Thanks, Kirsty, and thanks to Bill and the Paydirt team for the conference and the opportunity to speak. The presentation is been lodged, and there's some appendices that are at the end of the presentation with respect to any ASX announcements for the data that sits on any of the individual slides, so I encourage you to look at that if interested. So the focus is nickel and Western Australia, and when you say nickel and Western Australia, then hopefully a lot of people in the room will immediately think of Kambalda. The Kambalda is synonymous with nickel and the success of the nickel business in Western Australia. And we're very blessed to have a project in Kambalda. Kambalda's produced 1.6 million tonnes of nickel metal since it was first discovered in 1966 by WMC Resources, just on the north side of Lake Lefroy. And there's a plan of the region of Kambalda. Our project is the green set of polygons. We have two nickel mines on that project, Foster and Jan, that produce just under 100,000 nickel tonnes prior to closure. And on the north side of the lake, the blue dots represent the historical nickel mines around Kambalda that mostly now sit in the Mincor portfolio. To our south is the Lanfranchi complex, which sits in private hands with Black Mountain and Tembo, private equity. And over to the west at Widgiemooltha, there's the Myrtle Mariners complex, and just off the image would be Mincor's great Cassini discovery of late, which has really supercharged and reinvigorated the nickel scene in the immediate Kambalda area. When WMC sold those nickel mines at the end of the 1990s and the early 2000s, our two mines, Foster and Jan, was shut. That's a key feature. Just remember that. WMC, at the same time as it was selling its nickel mines, was also selling its gold business. And at the time, they sold St Ives and Agnew further north to Goldfields Limited. And because Foster and Jan was shut, they didn't take part in the nickel mine sales. They got sold with the gold to Goldfields. So essentially, those two nickel mines in the belt that they sit on lay fallow from 2001 right through to 2015, when Lunnon Metals, in its private capacity, joint ventured that project with Goldfields. So it missed the last nickel boom. It missed the opportunity to take part in the success that Mincor, Panoramic and Independence had by buying nickel assets from WMC and being up and running during that last nickel boom in the 2007, 2008 period. So here we are. It feels like the slide says the next nickel boom. We kind of feel like we're almost in it. So we got our timing pretty right. And that value proposition that these assets missed the last nickel boom is what we took to the IPO in June 2021 last year. Last year was all about converting a private company into a public company, raising the money. And I'd like to say thanks to Andrew McKenzie and the team at Euroz Hartleys for the great job they did in getting us going, getting drill rigs. We got those. And of course, obviously, when you're exploring, you want to hit nickel. And I'm pleased to say we did that. So this year is all about converting that success from last year into something tangible. And the best way of converting exploration success into something that can be measured is obviously to grow your resource. And I'll take you this morning through what we plan to do at Baker, a new discovery, what we're doing at Warren, part of the Foster complex, and also a program we call the Historical Core Program, which is a key plank in our growth strategy. We're also looking at the deep potential on the properties, and I'll touch on a couple of our targets there. But 2022 is all about really preparing for on the back of that success, is preparing to try and catch up with Mincor. Mincor, David Southern and the team have done a great job, as I said, not only finding Cassini, but getting it permitted, getting it going. And they're delivering ore now to the Kambalda concentrator, and sometime this quarter, they'll start feeding that ore into the Nickel West concentrator and producing nickel. So another key focus for us this year is expediting our approvals, turning that success, turning that resource growth into something tangible and getting back underground at Foster, and also then factoring Baker into our plans. Nothing much has changed on the register. I mentioned St Ives. We were in joint venture with Goldfields for 6 years prior to the IPO. That's where they got their 44-odd million shares. They're our largest shareholder at 32%. Otherwise, there's nothing really on the register that's quite odd. Quite tightly held because of St Ives' position and the previous private owners of the private company, Lunnon Metals. So we have a large escrow position that's still escrowed until June next year. And then looking at the board, I'd like to make special mention of welcoming Deborah Lord to the board. We've got a new independent non-executive director. She's a geologist like myself, a similar vintage to me, but she comes with deep corporate governance experience. She's worked for very large companies. She's also chair of the Valmin committee. And she's complementing a board that has heaps of local experience. Liam, Twigger has been advising companies on buying and selling assets in the Kambalda region for over 20 years. Ashley McDonald, who represents Goldfields, was part of the legal advisory team for Goldfields when they bought the asset 20 years ago. And then I actually headhunted him from Minter-Ellison's to come and work for Goldfields to bring that knowledge in-house. And then Ian Junk's probably the best known of the directors, and he's been part of successful restart nickel mines. He was a key part of Mincor being successful when they started in 2001 with his brother Lee in Donegal Resources. He then did it again with Peter Harold at the Lanfranchi mine for Panoramic. So Ian's restarted nickel mines 2 or 3 times in his career, and his experience is invaluable to us. And then myself and Aaron, both geologists. I first landed, as Kirsty said, as a fresh off the boat POM in 1987 at Kambalda. I left and then came back in 94. Aaron started in 96. And on and off, both of us, one way or another, have been pretty well on that property that I'm about to show you ever since. And if you're going to be stuck as a geologist on a property, there's not many better places on the planet than Kambalda in terms of its gold endowment. I think obviously numbers that come out of St Ives and Goldfields aren't as detailed as they used to be, but that asset must be up to 15 million ounces now in terms of production and endowment. So it's a world-class gold belt in its own right. And as I mentioned previously, nickel, 1.6 million tonnes. So there's definitely, we think Kambalda drives a premium, and that premium is based because it's high grade, above a 1% cutoff. The grade's typically 3%. I've mentioned Nickel West and Mincor's work. There is a concentrator nearby. It's a hungry concentrator. I think Mincor are delivering up to 600,000 tonnes, but that concentrator is capable of up to 2 million tonnes. And the assets have this amazing record of longevity, and I'll show you that in a second. And because of that premium, we're very lucky as a junior company. We've got 3 firms that are already covering us, not just with speculative buys, but with price targets. And just last week, Foster Stockbroking over East initiated coverage with a $1.50 price target, and that's their chart. And no surprise that our closest neighbour on the chart, on the grade axis, is Mincor, because we're both in Kambalda. Their bubble's a bit bigger than ours, but that's a gap in terms of value that we're looking to close as quickly as possible, especially over the next 12, 18 months. So just on that record of longevity, this is a chart that shows all the nickel that was mined at the assets that were bought by those 3 junior companies back in the early 2000s at the point of sale by WMC, so how much WMC mined, and then the second bubble is how much nickel was mined at those assets in total. So the difference between those 2 bubbles is essentially the nickel that WMC left on the table. And that was win-win, because not only did those companies do really well when the nickel price went up, but WMC, Nickel West, now BHP, got that ore through their concentrator through an offtake agreement. So it was win-win, but our assets were shut. They got sold with the gold, so we've only got 1 bubble. So the team's job at Lunnon Metals is to develop the second bubble and make sure it's as big as possible and as far across on the bottom axis as possible. But these assets, that enables the analysts, when they look at Lunnon Metals, look at our 39,000 tonnes of nickel resource, which we obviously are confident will grow. They can see the record of assets. They can see we're on granted M's. They can see the proximity of the Kambalda concentrator. So it gives the analysts confidence to be able to actually map a value to our share price. So I'm going to zoom in on the project now. Geologists typically like to complicate things, but I've stripped all the geology off this image other than one, and that khaki-coloured unit is the Kambalda komatiite. All the nickel that's ever been found in Kambalda is at the base or very close to the base of that rock unit. So in Kambalda only terms, that's 1.4 million tonnes of metal. So the geology gods have made it very easy for us. We know where to look. It's a very well understood contact. And also shown on that image is our 39,000 tonnes in current resource projected to surface at Warren, 85H at Foster, and Foster South. So I'm going to take you on a wee tour of that map. We're going to start at Baker, our new discovery. That's on the right-hand side, up near a gold open pit, which I'll refer to in a minute. And then we'll swing back around that fold structure. It's called the Kiwi Anticline. We'll have a look at Warren and the success we've had at Warren. We'll look at the N75C, and then we'll finish off with a couple of deep targets at Kenilworth and at Jan Deeps. And we've been busy since IPO. We've drilled 21,000 metres. When we forecast our drill targets at IPO, it was 28,000 metres for the whole 2 years. And the reason we've overperformed on drilling is directly related to the Baker discovery and where it sits. And we'll have a look at that now. So Baker Delights was the announcement, kind of the pun on the ASX announcement, but it is a delight. That open pit I referenced with the laser is shown in an image there, and it's also just at the top of that plan view there. So it's only 300 to 400 metres away, and that's important because that open pit gets down into fresh rock. And the really significant thing about Baker, not only the widths and grades, fantastic, but it's extremely close to that open pit. It's only 300 or 400 metres from that pit, so it gives us an obvious future underground portal access, remembering we're on granted M's. This area was actually drilled by WMC. They drilled it on a pretty broad, strange grid, up to 150 metres apart, with surface drilling in the 1970s. And they hit nickel. It's not on the contact, it's in the hanging wall about 30 to 60 metres off the basalt contact. And what they hit was kind of 1 or 2 metres at quite low grade, modest grade, 0.5 to 1%. And we actually had an exploration target in our prospectus for this area, and it was about 500,000 tonnes at 1.5%. So we knew the area was fertile, but I have to say, being frank, one of the reasons we went back and drilled it, as Peter Harold said this morning, we were sitting in October waiting for the drill results from our first IPO campaigns. And as Peter mentioned, the delay on assay returns had gone from 2 weeks to 4 weeks to 8 weeks. And in our case, we were waiting, being told 13 weeks. So I had a chat with Aaron. I said, look, we really probably should just go in and do something. We can't have this rig sitting around. So we actually took a punt and went and infilled this, knowing that there was nickel there. And we'd had an earlier drill hole that had come back with, I think it was one at 7.4% that told us that there was some high grade there. But really, we just rolled our sleeves up and said, let's go and drill this out 40 by 40. And to be honest, we were completely gobsmacked with what we found. And when we do the resource, which is on foot, we will put out some inventory. But when you strip away the drilling that we've done and you leave just the WMC drilling, the ore body that we've now found literally rakes right between the drilling. You could not have put this in any other orientation, and WMC have not hit it in the early 1970s. In fact, if they'd just drilled the odd 1 or 2 holes in the middle of their pattern, they would have hit some of these drill results. And in 1970, they probably would have drilled it out and exploited it. So again, the geology gods were smiling on us. It's near surface, it's got some great widths and grades, it's close to possible open pit access. And the real impact for us is it's enabling us to stop thinking about Foster only. I'll show you Foster in a minute, but up until we found Baker, all of our plans to move from an explorer to a developer were all focused at Foster. But now we've found Baker, we realise we can actually do Baker first, we can do Baker in parallel, and maybe Baker can pay for the restart at Foster. So it just opens our eyes to possible advancement of the project. And the lessons from Baker is don't be scared of the gaps. Obviously, we used to work for WMC. It was a pretty good company, one of the best geoscientific companies in Australia before it disappeared. But just because they didn't drill something doesn't mean there isn't nickel there. So we've now got a policy of not being scared of those gaps, actually targeting those gaps, especially where the gaps are in drilling that's already fertile and demonstrating the presence of nickel, because the rewards are clearly worth the perseverance. Mineral resource estimation is on foot. Hopefully try and close that out this quarter. Rigs are mobilising back to site. There's a lot of nickel. There's a lot of value sitting on some of those higher, thicker grade intercepts, and we need to make sure we've got a complete handle on that. And we're moving forward in the geotech and the met inputs into that resource estimation exercise. And most importantly, we're factoring into our permitting and approval thinking framework. So that's Foster. So we've come back around that Cooey fold nose. That's a perspective looking down from the southwest to the northeast. It shows the 3 resources that are accessible from the old Foster decline, which is flooded to surface. And it shows you the assets, the headframe over the shaft, a great set of workshops, and a permitted discharge point to dewater that mine on Lake Lefroy. So we're going to look at Warren now, and then we're going to look at a target called the N75C, which actually sits behind that red shape, which is the 85H surface currently in resource. And then we'll look at some of the deeper targets. So again at Warren, it's a common theme, but again back in October with the diamond rig, we were thinking, well, look at what we've just found at Baker in between the WMC drill holes. And again, we decided let's just be a bit more aggressive with the diamond rig at Warren. And at Warren, it was mined, a very small amount of mining in the late 1980s. Richard Laufman, who's managing director of Rex Minerals, who some people may know, he's a good friend of the company. He was the underground manager at the time. And they hit some water they couldn't control. So they actually pulled out of that decline and left it behind. So what you're looking at Warren is essentially almost like a fly caught in amber. This is how WMC used to develop its ore bodies. Very scant, very little surface drilling, picking out the main channel, getting back underground with a decline, pushing that decline down and then drilling it out from underground and finding and filling in the gaps as they went. So this has been left behind. And with our diamond program, with a long projection in the middle, so you're looking to the east with north to the left of the page, we've come in and we're drilling between blank WMC holes that hit nothing, but were in the right terrain in terms of the channel and the geology. And as you can see on the program labelled number 1 section, with the section on the left hitting over 8 to 9 metres at between 3 and 3.5%. That sits between a gap of about 100 metres of drilling between two WMC holes that had nothing in. That blue shape, the blue rectangle, is a downhole EM conductive plate. We're hitting the nickel exactly where that conductive plate is. So we've got great confidence in that program, what that plate is telling us. And for reference, it's about a 55, 40 metre square plate, times that by the width, times that by the grade. And you can get a feel for each one of these targets as to how much they'll contribute to the resource. But the key goal at Warren, because it's a completely separate channel to Foster, is to demonstrate that it can be as prospective as Foster. We've only got 6,500 nickel tonnes at Warren. Very little was mined. Just a kilometre away at Foster, in a completely separate channel, 61,000 nickel tonnes were mined. 32,000 is still in resource, and that resource is still growing. So Foster's about 100,000 tonne endowed channel. Warren's only got 6,500. So the goal at Warren is to fill those gaps in. Again, not be scared of those large gaps in the WMC drilling. They're actually opportunities. And what it is showing us also is a great deal of complexity down dip. As we go down dip, it's not a simple structure. Complexity is good. Complexity is not something to be scared of because it dramatically increases the surface area that's available for nickel mineralisation. And not only are we hitting nickel in the trough, and this is an old WMC hole from down plunge, a WMC section from down plunge, we're also starting to hit nickel out on the sediment contact, and that's opening up huge exploration space, both at Warren, but also between Warren and between Foster. So at Warren, we're going to step down, we're going to keep being aggressive, we're going to step down the other side of that dike on the previous image, again, do the necessary geotech and the met work, and then look to update that mineral resource towards the end of the year when that deep drilling program is finished. And again, more importantly, actually make sure we include Warren in our restart plans at Foster in terms of dewatering and the mine re-entry. So that was Warren. We're now moving back across the mine. This is the old mine. Those workings you can see are the old Foster workings. In the hanging wall of this surface is our current resource called 85H, and we've stripped that away. And this is remnant mineralisation. Again, at IPO, we had historical estimates in our prospectus. When WMC shut these mines down, there was approximately about 16,000 nickel tonnes left in historical estimate that wasn't able to be reported to JORC standards. But there's 350 kilometres of diamond core on our project, all drilled by WMC, all drilled to a high standard, all assayed to a high standard. But we have to obviously demonstrate the quality of that information by select re-assaying. And the first one we've picked post-IPO is this surface, the N75C. We've just about finished this. We've re-assayed a suite of holes, got 97.6% correlation with the WMC assays, which is what we expected. But we're now just finishing the compliance reporting on this and hope to report this in the next 2 weeks. And we actually drilled a hole here, which is that FOS 21-3, came in at just under 8 metres, at just under 3%. Panels of mineralisation left behind by WMC when they shut that mine. So all of that mineralisation, when it does reach JORC standards, will work its way into a mine restart plans. It's all low-hanging fruit. It's all adjacent to the existing workings, and it's typically proximal to our existing resources that we've already declared. So as each one comes in, they might be quite modest, but they're going to have a significant contributory impact to the way we take the restart plan forward. So that's the mine at the discovery at Baker, which was a new discovery, but between WMC drill holes. And then at Warren, again, we're making discoveries and extending our existing resources between WMC drill holes. And at N75C, we're cutting the old WMC drill holes to add resources. But there's still potential, new potential, and especially at depth. Jan Shaft was the other mine. Jan shut even earlier than Foster in 1986. And WMC then put the old St Ives gold plant, for those of you who know Cambalda, put the old St Ives gold plant on top of the Jan workings and used the mine workshops as the mill workshops. So it shut quite early in the day. 560 metres might have seemed deep in 1986, but at the same time, some famous nickel mines in Cambalda, especially Otter Joanne, were at exactly the same vertical depth, and Otter Joanne went on to 1,300 vertical metres and right through, uninterrupted, through to 2018. So there's a huge potential. The contact's actually not that well drilled. Again, this mineralisation sits in the hanging wall. We've got high-grade, reasonable width intercepts sitting underneath those workings, and we're going to kick off a deep drilling program, both to test those chutes below the mine, but also to test the untested or previously undrilled contact shown with that arrow to the right of the workings. And then the other program is one we announced a couple of weeks ago. We got very lucky to get a grant from the WA government at a target called Kenilworth, which is both a gold and nickel target. And we've zoomed back out a little bit just to give you the context. There's a lot more geology than on that previous slide. But importantly, there's two significant gold camps. There's the Victory Leviathan Gold Complex to our immediate north, owned by Goldfields. That pit's being filled by tailings from the new St Ives plant at Lefroy. And then to our south, the Argo Apollo Hamlet Athena camp. Both of those camps are actually 3.5 million ounce gold camps. We have 7 million ounces of gold endowment produced, sitting within a 2-3 kilometre radius of the centre of our project. But because our project was a nickel project during the WMC days, and I can see some ex-WMC geologists sitting in the audience, not much gold exploration got done. It was screened at surface. There's certainly nothing significantly big at surface, but very little deep drilling. And we've got an excellent mag target that's either a magnetic dolerite and a potential gold host, or it could be a concentration of sulfides at depth. So hence it's a gold and a nickel target. And we kicked that off 2 weeks ago. It's got a planned depth of 1,450 metres, and it's the first ever hole at that depth through this rock package, which after the field being found in 1966 and 15 million ounces of gold and 1.6 million tonnes of metal is quite an incredible statement. So we've zoomed back out one more time, just giving you the context of where our project sits on the south side of the Lake Lefroy. You can see the St Ives gold operations owned by Goldfields to our north and south. And David Southern makes a lot of not mileage, but he emphasises that because of the presence of the Kambalda concentrator, Mincor doesn't need to build any process. It has no process capital requirements. And we're in exactly that same boat. We're capital light. The capital to restart Foster, the capital to access Baker because of the proximity of that pit is very, very modest. And there's none required for a process plant given our proximity to Nickel West. And Nickel West from its WMC days does retain an option on our nickel offtake, but we are allowed to discuss our offtake with other parties. But as a last step, we have to then revisit that discussion with Nickel West and give them the opportunity to match that offtake. But no capital required, and hence 2022 is about preparing for success, and that means permitting. So our regulatory goals are to be in a position to dewater Foster to Lake Lefroy. That's previously been permitted when we were in joint venture, but that permit needs to be excised from the joint venture proponents and put into our name solely, and that process is on foot. We're then going to permit the re-entry of the mine and do that to re-establish underground drill platforms and get up close and personal with those ore bodies. And we showed you on that slide that how these ore bodies can grow at depth and grow in size when you're up close and personal and able to drill them. And most importantly, with the discovery of Baker, we've got to factor Baker into our plans. It's not all about Foster. Baker has the significant potential to be a second operating centre for us at our project. And once we've got our arms around the resource at Baker and the updates at Warren and at Foster, and we've got our heads around the MET and the geotech, we'll restart conversations on the treatment options with the obvious parties. So that's just a quick snapshot. These are real assets. They're in a really historic, super endowed mining belt. We're blessed to have them. And that, just to finish off, is a picture of the famous Jack Lunnon wearing the hat on the right, looking pretty dapper, looking pretty pleased with himself. Well, he should be, because he drilled the first hole into a world-class nickel field. And drillers are important. Our drillers, shout out to Blue Spec and Kalgoorlie, doing an amazing job for us. Geologists might think they're smart, but if they haven't got decent drillers getting them to target, then it really doesn't count for much. So a great deal of history in Kambalda, but we're hoping to make our own history moving forward. Thank you very much.